to another episode of Who Knows What with Who Knows Who. Oh, it's me. I'm here today coming from sunny Western Connecticut, which has finally seen summer arrive. The pool is open. Woo! And today we're talking about loudness. That's not even as loud as it can go. All right, let's just let that play in the background. And first, the weather. Sunny, hot, not too muggy. That's one thing I like about New England so far that I do not miss about the South. Oh my gosh. So, quick tip, which we'll be talking about in the body of the stream today is, well, there's two quick tips. Louder sounds better, and you can actually clip for 3 to 5 milliseconds on a lot of signals, especially without pitch like drums, and nobody will ever know because humans don't move that fast, basically. This is a track I've been working on for a friend who hasn't done his part yet. I dug it up and started messing with it and thought, oh, this would fit the theme today very well because the name of the project was codename Distorto or Dr. Distorto, or I don't know yet. It's probably none of those things in the end. But the concept was loud, abrasive, unapologetic sounds. And this kind of has an art of noise for some reason feeling to me. Definitely 80s influenced. I can't help it. But we'll go down through this track here and dissect it and show you all of these tips. When I say louder sounds better, and we'll just jump in right here. When I say louder sounds better, I mean subjectively. And first, let's back up and let's define loudness. Loudness is a subjective quality of sound. Loudness is different for each listener, just like temperature is. Just like it's hard to say what's twice as loud for sure or half as loud, it's also difficult to say what is twice as cold or half as cold because it's subjective. And you have the feels like temperature, which reminds me kind of the equal loudness curves issue, where the same frequency, it's the same loudness, a different frequency will sound louder than another at different loudness levels. Well, that's not a clear as mud right there. It just means that we hear soft to loud differently at different frequencies. So a sound that's really loud may sound very bass heavy. That same sound turned down quite a bit will not sound bass heavy anymore, even though the other frequencies will be just as present. The bass will be less perceived as loud. And so that is one of the things that makes getting a loud mix, if that's your intention, difficult. Because you have frequency, and then let's talk about time. You can usually divide up audio concepts into frequency and time based. And time based is the concept that ears are averaging. So we have a peak level and an average level, and together those two levels tell us something about the loudness of a sound. And that's technically known as crest factor, the difference between the peak and average level. And also, since it takes a while for our brains to register how loud something is, we can actually clip something pretty hard for a few milliseconds and you'll never notice that it sounds clipped. Now this is true for drums and percussion, less true for like a vocal, for example. And it's actually adding some high frequency energy, because anytime you put a sharp edge on a waveform, like the difference between a sine and a triangle, for example, you will generate upper harmonics above the fundamental. And so clipping, of course, generates harmonics because it's putting a sharp edge on the waveform. And in the case of a percussion sound, sometimes that's a good thing. So even though you might clip by a few or many dB, depending on how long you're clipping and how much above clipping the signal, the input signal goes, it can still sound pretty powerful even after it's clipped, because we're adding some brightness to that transient. So the transient's lower, but it's brighter. So kind of, it doesn't, you get a little bit of wiggle room there where you can clip sounds and then they sound better and better, and then they sound worse. So the law of diminishing returns is ever at play, but oftentimes you get a few bits of gain in there, literally gain in this case, but gain as in improvement before you start to see the degradation. So let's break down this track. Oh yeah, there's the cymbals. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. Oh, you also get to see this hilarious bug that I've been able to only reproduce a few times. And if you'll notice the master section here, there are tracks above the master section. How did I do that? Well, I didn't really do it. I did a sort devices command, and it put a few things up there by accident. Nothing else seems to be misbehaving, but it is just weird seeing things above the hardware interface, because that's always at the top. Or so I thought. I found a way to make it not be. And again, it doesn't happen until you have a certain number of tracks and then you sort them. And I'm not sure, I wrote it down in the bug report, all the ways to reproduce it. It's not that interesting, really. So let's first of all look at the mastering. Let's work our way from the top back down on this one and see. We can see our highest peak is at -0.1. I usually try to keep it a little bit below that, but it doesn't do that very often. For example, of course, the intro is very quiet. Let's skip ahead to where the bombs go off. Yes, that's where it definitely gets to be all the way up to -1. Okay, so what are we doing? Let me just play a little bit of that and bypass the mastering. I'll play the sections before and after the loud part, and then you can hear what it's doing. So a decent amount. It's also got some delay, so it jumps when I bypass. So I'm not really doing a whole lot with the mastering. I am already, let me see, let's look at the actual plugin. This is my mastering chain usually. For anything electronic, usually some widening. In this case, more than I've ever used before, because it just kept sounding better. And a ceiling of 0.5 dB, and I think the rest are default settings. And then the threshold to give me a few dB. And let's just go back and play that same bit right there and watch the meters here. Okay, so you can see it's not more than a few dB of limiting going on. Then we also have a few dB of mix bus compression. Let's look at that. Oh, hardly any. Literally a few dB. I think I had more and I didn't like it, so I turned it back down. Usually my gain reduction meter on the SSL mix bus compressor is going to be between 0 and 4. It doesn't seem to talk about your law of diminishing returns. It kicks in pretty quick with this device for me. Even with my side chain in there to keep the bass from squashing it too much. And at this part of the song, it's hardly ever hitting because everything is already so damn loud before we even get to the limiter section. And we can hear this before and after too. By the way, I didn't do that. Let's bypass the master compressor. I'll be the first to admit that's hardly a huge change or anything. It's still fairly subtle, the difference there. You'll hear a lot more difference with the limiter because it's actually boosting the overall gain as well as limiting. Let's look at the tracks. All right, this is divided up like I usually do. I've gotten into this habit with Reason of putting these drums as kits, multiple kits. I worked on a project where Matt Chamberlain played drums, one of my favorite all-time drummers in the world. And on that project, he had his main AOT kit, he had a V-drums kit, and he had a Taos kit. And on many songs on that project, which was a Juno winner for Chantal Kraviazik, a Canadian artist on Sony, that many of those songs, there's all three in there, and he would just play these parts in mind, with the other parts in mind. That's just what he does. It's amazing because it all works together, and it certainly doesn't sound like a lot going on, and then it just sounds like this crazy ear candy percussion stuff going on when the Taos kit or the V-drum kit, and oftentimes the V-drum kit was through a guitar amp. So when those are playing, you just get a little bit of extra stuff going on. They're not doing the full part. So in this track, I have a similar thing happening. Actually, at the front, there's no drums, so we'll just watch them build slowly. Okay, very simple. Homage to Halloween by Ministry. And then the 80s drums. Dyna Kit. I sampled into the Fairlight originally and then into the S900. Okay, now we got so there's all sorts of stuff going on there. I should probably play that a few times. This is the alt drums refill. Where is this? Anybody who has this will recognize this. This is the AOT kit. So many drums. I don't know. Oh, there it is. I can't remember how this one was organized exactly. This is the alt drums, or the, what was the name? It had another name. And these drums are so processed that it's hard to do more with them, but I squashed the snare a little bit more because it has that great ringing sound to it. Let me go back and play that again. So, okay, this is the process with that track. This is worth looking at because this is the beginning of making everything loud and building it. Let's see what we do. We are putting this all in a combinator for some reason. I can't remember. I don't think I actually did anything with it, the combinator per se, but I just think it originally came from Reason 11. So maybe it did it when I converted it. Okay, so this is obviously having a big effect on the sound. You can probably hear most of what it's doing is the saturation effect. Yeah, that's without the saturation on. So, giving the kick a pitch, giving the snare a honk. It's supposed to come at you and just be annoying, and that's the perfect sound for that. Then it goes into the leveler next. And of course it stops there. Without the leveler. With it. So you can hear how that just brings up the ambience and makes the sustain a little bit more. So when we're doing all this, we are losing some transients at the benefit of the loudness. And that's what the trade-off you're going to make through the whole process, is trying not to take too much off the top with your clippers and leave enough so you don't have that new haircut effect. And then this last coloring EQ, I think, is just doing more saturation, because why not? Before. After. Yeah, I didn't have enough. So the main thing is band 3 here is doing just a little bit of a 3.9 dB boost with around 50% saturation drive, and that's just giving it that mid-range honk. There are other drums doing the bottom and the top stuff, so this is effectively staking out the mid-range, and this only happens on the big sections. I don't know what else to call them. The big sections. Because you gotta admit that bass drum sounds a little funky. And also, let's go back to this. Since this plays all the way through the song. This is a Kong doing the bass drum thing. With a little bit of Transient Shaper. And then some clipping. We're probably adding a little spike to the top and then taking it right back off again. And what that does is it puts more aggressive attack on the front of the sound, and then taking it off with the clipper is basically just giving us the loudness back. Let's see before and after. Oh, I should just solo this so we can actually hear this. Bypass the clipper. There it is. So not a lot of a difference, right? And it goes to a halftime pattern in the big section. And I'm automating the feedback and the wet-dry mix throughout this. You can see it going up and down all over the place there. And there it comes back in again. Gives us the galloping effect. Shout out to Kate Bush, by the way, for having running up that hill #1 again after 40 years. Speaking of a galloping drum effect. And so it's not really changing the sound much. It's just controlling the level. In fact, can we see this over here on the meter? The echo effect is changing it a little bit, so it's kind of hard to be absolute. I could just bypass that, so let's do that. I want you to see the effect, here we go, of the clipper. If there is any. Yeah, you can see the level just goes up. Peak level goes up 3 or 4 dB, and that correlates with what we're seeing here, which is 3 or 4 dB above the input level. So the red is what's being clipped. It's not actually there anymore, but it's showing you in red, so you'll be able to see how much you're removing. But that's the beauty. You don't hear that as distorting the kick drum. It's just bringing our peak level down. It's not making it louder either at that point. The way it's set up, it's not adding gain. It's just removing or reducing the peak. the transient, the little bit at the top of the sound, the attack. If we look at, I didn't even think about this. We can see the sample has, whoa, that's an interesting sample. This is the attack here. So it's already chaotic. You don't see the pitch evolve until here, which, how much time is that? We don't know. Oh, yes, we do. My glasses can't adjust. 0.01, that's 10 milliseconds in. So this whole little bit here is the transient. And I'm not able to see, it's not a good example actually of clipping because it's a processed sound, just like the alt drum kit. It's already processed, so that's why I only have to clip it by a little bit. If it was a kick that I had recorded myself, I'd probably be doing a lot more to it because there's room to do a lot more to it. Let's keep going through the track though. Okay. This is one of my favorite tricks. It's next in the track. It doesn't come in until halfway through the song, but I'll show you what it's doing. So I'm using a beat map, and I'm using a college drum loop, but I'm not using the loop. I'm triggering the slices. And I've set the attack and decay down quite a bit. I haven't adjusted the pitch, but sometimes I'll take the pitch up a little bit to make them even shorter and smaller, and then I'm using the infuser to brighten them up and give them a little sizzle. And that's kind of a little, almost like a percussion thing, and it's auto panning. I'm actually using the LFO out of Dr. Octarex into the pan of the channel. That's it. That's my auto panning. And I'm not even tempo locked. I just adjusted it until it started to not sound in time, but not sound out of time. So it's almost like it kind of does 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's kind of like a dotted delay effect where it has a little bit more syncopation and funkiness in a good way than a straight delay, but it's still landing on beats. So it's not a triplet, which would put us off the grid. It is still on the grid. Or actually, in the case of the panning, I don't know if it is or not because I didn't time it. It's supposed to just be buzzing around your head, kind of like a fly or something. Then we have these two other tracks, and for the life of me, I was trying to remember how I came up with these. But they work really well panned opposite of each other, 50% left and 50% right up here in the mixer. What I can't remember is what the source is. But I love stuff like that that's just kind of extra stuff. It makes my tracks be a little bit busy in the end. Here they are. They're just electro drums, dubstep loops, I think from the Reason library. Probably from the Reason library. Nothing fancy. I just found something that worked. It's usually, for me, the process is just to go through sounds and go through them and go through them until I find something that works. And I'm doing a similar thing here, adding low saturation. I'm actually doing a cut to add saturation. So I'm cutting the EQ but adding saturation, so it's kind of, if you do it just right, it doesn't add low end or take away low end, but it adds saturation. The further you pull this fader down, the more saturation is added. I think of it like digging a hole and taking the dirt out and putting gravel in instead, and then making it the same level when you're done. The ground is still level, but now there's gravel in a little area instead of dirt. And the gravel would be the saturation in that story. So this is two parts that come in and play off of each other for interest. And that's, instead of finding a cool percussion part, because percussion can give it a certain flavor sometimes that maybe it's not what you're looking for. I'm trying to keep it electronic and not acoustic and not put that in there. So I'll use existing drums. I'll use electronic drums or kit drums in new ways to try to get them to fill in the area that might have been a percussion track, a shaker or a tambourine or other hand drums on another song. And then we have the Dyna Kit. It only does that at one point. The rest of the time it's doing this, which is why the reverb makes sense. I don't know, maybe I'll take that reverb down there. It gets really splashy. And in all of that chaos, I'll often have one of my drum tracks be doing kick and snare to make sure that they punch through on these beats. And so my dynamics come from all the different layers playing. The soft layers are the soft beats. And when you hear them in the holes, it sounds like there's a kick pattern going on that's not really going on. Hopefully it also sounds unique and not like other things. Let's go to the loud part and hear this. The last thing I added, you can actually see it here. Oh, those are the MIDI notes. That's not going to be exciting. But this is just automation I drew in. That's all it does. It's being, where is it? I don't know where it ended up when I hit sort. I don't know my way around my own song project. I probably just passed it. Here. Let's go by color. It's orange. Reason orange. There it is. Oh no, that's the other orange. It probably didn't get sorted correctly. There it is. All right, so this has there it is. This is the processing for the cymbal. One of the cymbal crashes had a really weird ring. This is about the only time you get to go surgical on something when you're doing a messy, noisy project anyway. This was just too much. Let's see if we can hear it here. You can kind of see it. And then if we solo it, we should be able to hear. There it is. I'm not hearing it. Maybe it got moved. But that was just a weird resonance ringing in the cymbal. Metal cymbals do that. I used to have a pair of hi-hats that had a 14K resonance if you didn't close them tightly. And tape would help. A piece of tape on a strategic spot would help. But a few times I recorded them accidentally before I discovered this and had to use a notch filter to take it out, because once you start compressing, and that's what the leveler is doing here, is just bringing everything up. Here's what it sounds like without that. I should be looping from the sequencer so I can hear this. That's all it's. Okay, so now let's hear it with the sustain on it. And I'm not even doing 100%. It's probably way too much. And all that chatter at the end, you don't hear that in the end. Okay, so now I want to go back. That you've heard all these parts. Now that you've heard all these parts separately, I want to put it back in context so you can hear what's going on in the big picture. You can watch up here. There's the Dyna Kit. For the real fun, I don't remember. This was probably over a year or two ago. It might have even been 3 or 4 years ago. I started this project around then, and I can't remember how early this piece was. I did this track. Let's just solo that here. Zoom out. Okay, so this is it purple here. It's just one channel. My guess is it's the MiniBrute because it's mono. My other modular stuff or the peak behind me would have been stereo. But I made it stereo with a simple single delay at 29 milliseconds. So I guess it's Haas effect. I moved this around. I wasn't trying to do Haas effect. I was just trying to make the sound wider and just flam a little bit so that the two didn't hit at the same time. That's one of the things about loudness, is that you can make things sound louder than they are just by doing things like a flam sounds louder than two sticks hit at exactly the same time concept. And that's what was going on there. I probably could even make that a little bit longer of a delay there and still have it work. That doesn't sound bad either. The idea is to just make it gnarly, and then we've got that weird resonant peak there to try to make it so you can hear the pitch. And then we have, and I'm using soft clipping on all of these, by the way. I noticed that I think I did that on everything on these. This is getting a lot of clipping because those attacks with the frequency sweep, with the pew pew sounds, they are what I'm trying to balance. So the more I clip it, actually, the further I push those sounds down, and the more I get the, the body, the sustain, the Godzilla factor. These little pew pew sounds, they need to be loud, but they can't sacrifice the body. So I noticed when I was turning the clipper, more intense clipping, I was losing those pew pew sounds, and it didn't sound like it was smacking you. And the idea was to make it just you think it's loud already and gets to that part of the song and it's even louder. And this is the main track. There's 3 tracks that contribute to that. This is the main, and it's let me see if we can even tell that we bypass that. Doesn't sound like, sorry, laughing into the microphone. Doesn't sound that different sometimes. You work and work and work on it and think, oh, that's it. But there it is. It gets a little fartier up on the top end. Anyway, the main thing though, it doesn't sound a whole lot different because it's already a pretty squashed sound. The main thing is it controls the master level by putting clippers on strategic places. In this case, I think I had the mix pretty good without this, and was noticing something was peaking and pushing us a lot hotter than it looked like it was normally. And I discovered it was this track, and so I put that on, and also the first kick drum that comes in, the 4 on the floor. And I put clippers on both of those, and all of a sudden I had like 3 or 4 more dB of headroom that I opened up to bring everything up louder. And it wasn't hurting the sound, and may in fact have been improving the sound. The other 2 helpers that come in here are these 2. This is the Shapeshifter oscillator. Okay, this is good actually if you hear it from all the way back, because the idea is it's trying to make something sound like it's getting shredded. So hopefully it has that effect there. Almost like scraping across a record with a needle. And some high frequency rate modulation. Just let it play. There's a little boost at the end. I probably did that manually as writing it as I'm playing it. And you'll notice it's a chord because the Shapeshifter has chord mode where you actually have all these built-in chords that you can trigger, which is really kind of a bonus for a modular oscillator. It's not an analog oscillator like the MiniBrute is, but between these two, it's quite a wall of sound when they kick in. And appears to be a good bit of delay on these bad boys. And anything else in their little inserts? Nope, they're already squashed. Maybe doing something in the mixer, just some low pass or high pass, low cut. Oh, I'm doing a little mid-range boost to the SSL. Pretty significant low cut there. I don't always get that aggressive. All right, so that's all that does is pretty much that one part of the song. The beginning of the song is peak. And it's just playing an evolving pad, and the chopping part, let's not make a liar out of me. Let me make sure it's not coming from Alligator. Might be. Is it? Yes, it is. I didn't know if I did it with the CV input of peak from one of the modules or Alligator. I did it with Alligator. So what's going on? There's the original patch. I think it's going to play that series of notes and loop. Oh, that was my loop. That's why it was abrupt there. Let me turn that off. Pretty boring sound. But now, with this, now you'll also notice in the, staying in the context of loudness, it's not as loud when it's chopped up like that. And it's louder in a way and not as loud in another. It's louder because it gets your attention now, because it's rhythmic, but it's not as loud because it's only there for half the time now. I'm taking out half of the time that pad was playing previously, and so there's less going on. So it has a lower average level because the sound is missing for half of the duration. And but it has some interest now, rhythmic interest, that might draw you to it. And that's another thing that we should talk about before I move on, and that is that sometimes a repetitive sound, a pattern that just plays and repeats, can appear to be quieter because the brain will tune it out after a while. And the new sound or the change to the old sound is what will get your attention back. So if I'm doing this one pattern, then all of a sudden I start to do something busier, you will probably start paying attention to that thing that you probably have tuned out after a certain bit. Plus, when new sounds come in, they will take your attention away from the existing sounds. Another trick for louder mixes that I'm not doing here that you can do is just the basic, it's just psychology, human psychology, the way that we tend to hear things. And when you have a new sound come in, you gravitate towards that sound. And that means that you can take the sound that was already happening and lower it a little bit at that point. So as you build your track and introduce new things, I don't often do this. And to be honest, the master compressor does it for you a little bit. If you set it up just right for that. And so the new thing coming in will get your attention. You can take the old thing down and make room for the new thing a little bit, but also just make room for headroom in the mix now, because you don't need that repeating thing to be that loud anymore. So if you play with the frequency range, knowing which frequency ranges rather are louder to the ears, the upper mid range, like where that peak pad is a place that we're more sensitive. And if you play with the busyness of the part, or the the repetition versus the change, you can bring attention to things without making them louder, which means that you can also make them softer. You can really play with it. You can't do more than a dB or two. It's not like a huge thing. And the idea would be that every dB counts towards getting something louder. I don't have many more tracks here. Most of these are just icing on the cake at this point. But we can hear them. Oh, I didn't really talk about these. MiniBrute. Just doing something and probably just distorting the crap out of it, because everything was getting distorted when I was doing these on purpose. I don't see any distortion here. I either ran it through the guitar amp, the Vox AC15, or I just used the brute factor on the MiniBrute, which I happen to love. And we should have some of these other things coming in at some point here. I love the thumper sequence. Let's go see where I keep hitting F8. Here we go. This is where all this stuff starts happening. The end sequence. Gotta start there. Doing some panning and some delay, obviously. I would guess a dotted 8. Some mid-range boost and serious saturation. Without saturation, not as serious as I thought. Oh, maybe so. I didn't count the delay. I guess the delay is coming from the send here. I'll often put an insert delay. I'll just put the echo right in here with this. What am I using the LFOs for? Oh, the panning. Okay. So, are we synced, by the way, with the panning? Nope, this is just another free. No, it's 12/4. It is synced, so it's every 12 beats. Automating the decay rate of a pulse like that, I love doing that. I love doing it in triplets too, or in dotted. So 1 is long and 2 are short, instead of 4 long and 4 short. And obviously some sort of distortion going on there. Then at the end we get these 3 bendy parts, which is a monosynth again, I'm guessing, so probably MiniBrute. It's my only monosynth in hardware. And this was within the same year that I added a lot of the hardware, so I was, of course, using, there we go. So this eventually makes just a major triad. Here, I'll speed it up. There's our 5th, 3rd, root. And that comes in at the end. This one also has some clipping on it. As you can see, it's just a few dB of clipping there. I think that's -6. So if it went all the way up, that would be 6 dB. So it's only taking the top 3 dB off. The sound is already fairly squashed. If we look at it, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Wow, that's interesting. See the transients. Yeah, you can see it's already kind of sausaged on the front, even with that attack. There's a great example of a really sharp transient that's got a lot of brightness going to a sine in a very short amount of time. And so you're not going to clip a lot of the transient because it's already gone on this sound. Again, this was probably the MiniBrute through the brute factor at 50% or more, giving it that sausage shape already. So the other thing about when you're using clipping, it's everybody has a different approach. My approach is in my quiver of tools, or my toolbox probably is a better analogy. The clipper would be the top level I need to control those transients. A limiter, a brick wall limiter specifically, like a mastering limiter below that, a regular limiter, meaning not in mastering mode, not with look ahead usually, would be below that, and then a compressor below that, or somewhere in there is the leveler because it's zero attack and it can bring things up to zero, up to the same level. So instead of clipping them all at that same level, you're bringing them up to that same level. That and compression would be in there somewhere too, but it's the last line of defense. It's the thing that you do when you absolutely have to get that transient to not go over zero. And it's different. You know, there's a lot of information out there. You can Google, you can watch a lot of YouTube videos that'll give you more examples on this, the difference between limiting and clipping. The main difference isn't that obvious. It's a lot of times, well, it's like a contextual thing. Sometimes limiting will be more transparent for a particular sound. I'm talking about individual tracks now, not the whole mix. I don't use clippers on the whole mix. I don't tend to. I haven't really explored that. I guess this would be the project. So maybe we'll do that next. But the idea is that you use the tool that is going to give you the best result for the job at hand. And so you have your clippers, you have your limiters, and you have your compressors and your expanders and your upward compression. I typically have one or two of each of those tools that are my go-to for that job, because the job comes up again and again, and even though the context is different, the same rules tend to apply. You're still trying to control the peak to average level. And as a general rule, that's a quarter of my mixing philosophy. You know, the EQ balance would be good. Well, overall level balances is the first place that I would say I give a good chunk of attention to. Then the spectral balances, and then the ambience, the space it's in, and then the time factor, the peak versus average level. And what happens is if you have one track that has one instrument in a mix that has a very loud transient, so a very high crest factor, so it might have a peak all the way up to 0 on the big meter, which I don't even know where it's gone now. It's just not where it's supposed to be. It's way down here. It's confusing me. So you may have the peak all the way up to 0 here, and then the average down low. In fact, let's look for our little last segment here, last 10 minutes. Here is an example of, we have a transient shaper here, so we can really exaggerate things. This could be not a bad kick sound. But look at our levels. Okay, so let me zoom in here. So we're at -3 there and -25 here. So that's 22 dB crest factor. The peak to average. The difference is 22 dB. Now remember that it's similar to LUFS, and so you know that's not going to be a loud sound. Let's see what happens when we, help, get me out of here. I thought I already had it here. Let's put a limiter on this. Little clipper. This was free, so I really like it because it's so simple. There's a rack extension that's also free in Reason. I don't know how I missed it the first time around, but I will probably start using that because it's easier to not have the floating window. Okay, so when we're down this low, you can definitely hear we're doing something to the sound. It sounds mostly like we're just getting it brighter. Okay, so now let's look at this and watch where our peak goes to here. Okay, now we have a different peak to average. We have totally messed with the crest factor here. Here, I'll just zoom everything up so we can really see this. So we're at minus 18 and minus 26-ish, so maybe 8 dB crest factor. We haven't turned the level up or anything, but that is a different sound than that. This one sounds a little bit louder maybe, but here's the deal. When we turn this down, I'm going to be super extreme. We can turn the whole thing up now. Oh, my list up there at the top changes so much. We can go 18 dB louder now. Did I just... Okay, so what's happening is if I two finger over that knob, it moves it, so that's what why things just changed all of a sudden. Okay, so let's get this where I can see it so I can show it to you better here. We've turned this on and now we have I need to get everything on the screen at the same time. Oh, I lost you. Minutes. Now we can turn up the level. Now we're peaking at -3, just like we were before. So if we bypass that and bypass that, our peak level is back to where it was. In fact, if you really want to make it easy, let's combine these two. Then I can just bypass here and do them both at once. So this is changing the peak to average. Here's our peak at the same point, -3. Same point, -3. So it's not that this doesn't really change the sound. Now we're clipping the crap out of it too, way more than you'd need to. I would probably do a lot less than that. But I'd probably end up with all my sounds with a similar crest factor. Because as you can tell with this one in its normal state, that's as loud as it's going to get. We can go up a few dB more, but we can't do much more before we clip the whole mix, and it's just one thing. We're just talking about the kick drum. We haven't added anything else, and we could be that close to clipping the mix. So the only way to get it louder is to increase the average level, because the peak can't go any louder, but we can bring the average level up. We can bring it up a lot. And even if we don't bring it up that much, oh, that's too much there. Back or down. Back or down. There we go, -3. I'm looking at Selig gain down there. Okay. Even if we just do it a moderate amount, it's still a good bit. We're still coming from -24 range to, on the VU, to -20 to 18-ish. So we're getting 6 dB out of it for free, if you think about it. Now let me show you one more example before we end this, because this explains everything. I'm going to play you this little loop here. I'm not going to turn it up either. It's just going to be there. Now I'm going to change this though. Now tell me, is this louder than this? Seems like it is, right? Seems like that's a lot louder. And it's the same thing going on here. We've got the same peak level. We're hitting -12 in both cases. But let's see what we got here. Nice to have the big meter back where it's supposed to be. Okay, so here our average is 32, 31 at times. And here it's 36. It's hard to tell. The meter changes right here. If you're not familiar, this is 1 dB steps, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. Then it's 34, 36, 38, 40. So it goes by twos here. So it doesn't look like it's as much change, but it is. It's a 6 dB change there, just like it was in the other example. And basically, you're getting loudness through adding sustain. And in this case, we are holding the transient, the peak level at the same level so we can compare things in a real world manner. And why do I say real world? Because we have a hard limit on our meter here. We can't go over 0. And if we do, we have to do it under control and understand what we're doing. But for the most part, we just say don't. And that means that that's a fixed peak level we can't exceed. And so then it becomes an analog, because it was a soft clip on the tape machine. You would usually use VU meters and get your average level where you needed it to be. But I always remember the first time I recorded a little shaker and a triangle on something, and I put the needle up where it would be for a vocal, and it was just distortion city. And I kept turning it down, and I kept turning it down, and the level, and a tambourine will do this too, the level where it didn't distort anymore. And this was done by putting it in record and listening to the playback, to the repo head live, so you can hear the playback live as you're doing it with a slight delay. And finally, the needle's not moving at all, I don't think, or barely moving, and now I have a good clean signal. So that was my first lesson in peak versus VU levels. With digital, you worry more about the peak levels because that's what's going to determine your headroom. You know, in the case of that kick with the 24 dB dynamic range here. Oh, that's before clipping. And of course, now it's going over. We can only turn this up 3 dB and we're done. And we're still, our VU is still down here at minus 24. And also, every track has a different peak to average. So you can't set levels by VU and have them be consistent. Now, you can also argue if you set them by peak, they're not consistent either, because the fact that loudness is subjective. We're in a loop now, we're back to the top. And since it's subjective, then we can't really measure it with a meter. It's hard to assign a number to it. And in fact, even when we try to, as in the case with LUFS, we get into this complicated, is it integrated LUFS? Is it short-term LUFS? Is it what? You know, I don't know what, I've got a meter right here. There's all different ways to see it. You can see the dynamic range, the momentary max, the short-term max, the true peak, the loudness range. Let's see what it says about this kick drum, by the way. Bypassed. There we go. Let's reset it. This will be interesting. So there's our 22.3 LUFS, and remember I told you it was like 25 minus 3, so 22 dB crest factor is almost exactly the same LUFS. That's why I don't tend to use LUFS. The Reason meter already shows me that it's 23 dB or 22 dB crest factor. And so I usually don't even open this up anymore. Once I just did a couple of comparisons and saw that that was usually the case within a dB or so. And I'm not shooting for a target. If I was doing something where I had to turn in a master that was hitting a specific lufs, yeah, I'd have that meter on and locked in place and my eyes glued to it. But for music production, I just shoot for an area that works for me. I usually end up there naturally. I don't have to look at the meter and say, oh no, I'm not loud enough. If it sounds good, well, to quote Joe Meek's version of Duke Ellington's quote, if it sounds good, it is good. And because it's subjective. So I hope there's something in here for someone out there in my audience. And I know I covered a lot today, but the general ideas are the same as they were when I first started back in the 80s. I just understand them a lot better, and now we have a lot more visual tools. Oh, the one thing I didn't show was a visual of the length of clipping that's happening. I think that would be for another time, because that will get us down another rabbit hole, and we don't have time today for another rabbit hole. I will leave you with my attempt at a loud mix.